Hey, in this video I'm gonna talk about how to play Gunner in high-tier modded difficulties, using Volatile bullets, or VB for short. This content is primarily oriented towards modded players, who are trying to get into tier 6 and 6.5 modded difficulties. I'm not gonna cover basic topics, so I'm expecting you to have at least some experience and basic understanding of class roles. This video is divided into chapters, so feel free to skip between them. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, when you hear people talk about VB Gunner's role in modded, usually they'll mention something like, you need to kill stationaries, bulks, and use shields for safety and revives. And while this is mostly true, I think this oversimplified advice isn't really useful. So today I'll try to provide a little bit more information. First, let's talk about our build options. There are a few discussions here. First is about overclock on the minigun. With hot bullets, you can either pick Rotary Overdrive or Burning Hell. Both options are great, but which one should you choose? Honestly, it's mostly a preference in playstyle. Burning Hell provides more safety. You can clear trash enemies if you don't have driller close to you. It's definitely better as in generally close to mid-range combat. You get a lot of ignition value on goo bombers and fire bombers. Also, you can deal some very good damage because of hit spreading chokes. Rotary Overdrive lets you build up hit level much faster and sustain high hit level for hot bullets, so you can ignite and kill stationaries with VB much quicker. But as a downside, you're more vulnerable. You need to stay very close to your driller, otherwise you're gonna keep running out of primary ammo. Personally, I would suggest playing with Burning Hell, and if you find yourself struggling with stationaries too much, then switching to Rotary. But once again, it's mostly a preference. Now, the second topic isn't as complicated in my opinion, but I'm still gonna talk about it. It's the build of your shield. I believe that in 90% of scenarios, having a longer duration of your shield is much better than having a larger radius. Radius has some niche use cases, such as being able to shield more space around the Reton escort, or the entire uplink bubble on salvage. However, those extra 3 seconds of your shield are incredibly important. It can be the difference between getting the revive or not, killing an important HVT or stationary. But most importantly, with full duration you are able to get both revive that takes 6 seconds and the resupply that takes 2.5 seconds. Now, when it comes to choosing your grenades, it seems like a no-brainer. Lead bursters are objectively the strongest option. They compensate the lack of versatility with raw damage. You can very effectively kill barragers, bulk detonators, big crawlers, Noctera clouds, clear leeches off the ceiling, and even kill meteors during Omeran's fight if you throw it on top of the Hearthstone. But this grenade has some very important downsides that you should always consider while using it. First of all, the friendly fire. You should always make sure that there are no teammates in the area where you're about to throw the lead bursters. Very often the right play is to use it right after you shield, just to make sure that you don't accidentally hit somebody. Another issue is known as Stroy's move, that you can accidentally activate every stationary across the map, especially on salvage. Usually it's not a big deal on low tier difficulties, but as you move higher in tiers, the stationaries become more threatening. One Pentanuke Bowler or Monkey Barrager that has been activated for too long can ruin the entire mission. That's why, on difficulties with such stationaries, you might consider bringing Incendiary Nades, especially if your driller is running Sludge or Temp Shock. You can deal massive damage to Noctera Clouds and ignite your driller's Sludge for additional DPS. Cluster Nades is also a possible pick, but it's actually pretty hard to use effectively. You can deal decent damage against medium armor targets that don't have explosion resistance, such as weak Twin Dreads or Sentinels or Rush Praetorians. Also, it can be pretty useful when getting the revives instead of having to waste your shield. But unfortunately, most of the time it's not worth the trouble, so I suggest playing something else. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is a build on VB itself. Recently, more players have started playing True 2B, the recoil upgrade, instead of extra ammo. This allows you to hit multiple VB shots more consistently and quickly, without having to wait for a recoil to reset. I think it's pretty good for a stationary clear, and if you don't miss your shots, you can get a ton of value from that upgrade. At the same time, it limits your target pool. With this upgrade, you probably shouldn't shoot Praetorians and Sentinels, for example, or else you're risking running out of ammo. Personally, I've been using the classic VB build, and throughout the footage you'll be mostly seeing that. Now, let's talk about combat. VB Gunner is the most mechanically demanding class. You're expected to consistently hit your VB shots. So far, I found the best aiming style for that. You should always perform a fast flick, followed by a smooth macro adjustment. You should always prioritize accuracy on weak points over speed and body shot spam, so it takes some discipline. Not only you save a lot of ammo with that, but your time to kill on targets gets much lower. When it comes to hitting flying targets, don't try to perfectly track that weak point. Instead, try to predict the trajectory of your target and aim there. Also, you can use the stun from your minigun to keep the target in one place, so it's much easier to kill. Another combat trick with minigun that you probably already know, but I still have to mention, is that you can time your jumps so you only shoot while you're in midair, and this way you don't get slowed and you can hide bugs much easier. You should also learn how to properly manage your heat, especially if you're playing Burning Hell. If you're entering the new room, you can build up heat before you start shooting stationaries. Sometimes you can start shooting in the ground just for the heat. And then during fights you need to sustain that level of heat, even if it comes with slightly higher ammo consumption. To be honest, as a gunner you have a pretty good ammo economy. It's pretty rare to see gunner running out of ammo before NG, let's say. The only exception being at the start of the salvage and refinery missions, where you have to kill a lot of stationaries early on, which might cause ammo desync. For a gunner, it's mostly a matter of your attention cost, rather than your ammo cost in terms of target priority. Now, let's talk about the target priority. This is one of the hardest and most important skills you would need to learn. You only have 4 VB shots in the chamber, after which you would have to reload for 2 seconds, or wait for burn ready to proc for 5 seconds, so you need to choose very carefully what to kill first. It depends on the difficulty, but generally stationaries have the highest priority for you, especially the ones that shoot nukes, because you're not safe in your shields against them. If stationary has fast projectile, then it's higher in the list. So, for example, killing a bunch of speedballers would be more important than killing a barrager, because it takes multiple shots to kill and it has slow projectiles. Your next primary targets are bulks, menaces, and Noctera bombers, and their variants, and wardens. This is where a gunner outshines everybody else, because preferably you should kill these targets before they can cause trouble for your team. I see some gunner players making the mistake of ignoring Noctera bombers or wardens for too long, because usually they don't pose an immediate threat, but if you ignore them, over time they can make a huge difference and make it very hard to stabilize. By the way, there is one very important trick when it comes to killing firebombers, so-called phantom tech, since he taught me about it. You should always destroy one sack with minigun and then shoot the other one with VB if there are teammates around. Otherwise you might accidentally kill your teammates, because fobbers still drop their bombs if the other sack isn't popped. Your survivability and the target priority also heavily depends on your team composition. You should always analyze your teammate's composition before the game and think for yourself about what changes for you. For example, if your driller plays sticky, then you'll get easier time getting the ignition, but you might lack some raw damage, so you would have to use VB on Sentinels and Praetorians, for example. Or if your team decides to go on full-on AoE builds and brings Sludge and MCIO, you should be expecting to have very strong holds and damage, but your team probably fully relies on you in killing stationaries and some of the HVTs, which adds additional pressure, because Engineer doesn't have single target. If Scout brings Boomstick, then you'll have easier time killing stationaries during breaches, or if Scout brings Conductive Thermals, it allows you to one-shot bulks or weak dreadnoughts. So, just as a heads up, you should always consider your team composition before going into the mission. After all, hierarchies require a lot more coordination from the team. Now, let's talk about the positioning. That's the point of this video, with a lot of subjective takes. I'm describing my own playstyle as a player who consistently plays tier 6.5 difficulties, so this is my mindset. I think the current meta in these difficulties for a gunner is to be as much aggressive as possible. A lot of the time you are at the tip of the spear. You want to create as much space for your team as possible, while still providing safety, and this is where the tricky part comes in. You need to have full trust in your team to cover you. You must push, you must take the initiative in the team, but if you die while pushing, it can be very bad. You need to learn and analyze the risks you're taking, so even if you die, your team should be able to pick you up and stabilize. That's one thing. Another thing is that you always need to have a clearer goal with your pushes. You're not mindlessly pushing just because you can. You're trying to achieve something for your team. So maybe you can improve your team's position by pushing into a better holding spot. Or you have to push because of the mission's progression, like on Salvage, where you have to clear the room and push towards the mules first. Basically, you need to have a sense of why you're pushing. It's pretty hard to explain sometimes, and mostly comes with experience. The only obvious advice here is that you should pretty much never push during the swarm, and you should never push if you're out of ammo or shields. Speaking of which, let's talk about probably one of the most complicated topics of this class. How and when should you use your shields? Nobody really has one correct answer to that. It depends on your playstyle and different scenarios, so let's talk about it. We've talked about creating space for your team, and the shield is your main tool for that. Let's note a couple of things ahead. First of all, when you shield into the room, you're isolating yourself from your teammates for a few seconds, but more importantly, you're blocking their shots with your shield. You need to be very careful with that. Sometimes it's better to shield on the side, so your teammates still have a line of sight. Second thing, your shield does not make you invulnerable. You can die to exploders if they start popping before you shielded. Most projectiles with AoE can reach you if you're too close to the edge. Sentinels can dig and kill you. You can get nuked, etc. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, so you need to always look for that and prevent those deaths in the shield as much as possible. They're still gonna happen, but try to minimize them at least. Your time in the shield is very limited. With max duration upgrades, it's only 12 seconds, so you should spend most of that time killing important targets. In coordinated teams, I go as far as skipping the revives in my shields and letting somebody else get it while I'm shooting something, so you really don't want to waste your time inside the shield. Right before the shield ends, you should start moving and escaping it, because ranged enemies still keep shooting at you when you're inside of the shield, so you might get an unlucky timing and instantly die to a pre-fire as soon as the shield ends. So, generally, it's easy to understand when to shield during a push or a breach. It's pretty intuitive. However, there is one thing I'd like to mention. When you breach or push into the room, you often want to shield further into the cave. Don't shield just the entrance. This allows you to create more space for your team and get a better line of sight on stationaries. One little trick that could help you is combining dash with your shield. You can dash into the room, and as you're in midair, you can throw your shield, predicting where you're going to land. This is very risky, because you can easily die or get grabbed by the leech while doing that, but it gives you a lot of space and perfect line of sight. Truly high risk, high reward play, so it's up to you whether you'd like to use it or not. Now, let's talk about general defensive use of the shield, outside of pushing. This is where it gets really complicated. There are too many factors to consider, so the more you play, the better you'll understand how to do it properly. The focus here is trying to use your shields proactively instead of reactively. So, for example, you anticipate a threat, and you use your shield to prevent the death of your teammate, instead of waiting for them to die and shielding afterwards to get the revive. A very common scenario to use your shield is when there is a threat and your team is forced to stay at a certain place. For example, when taking the resupply, or repairing a mini-mule on salvage, or broken pipelines on refinery. Off the top of my head, I can think about a few typical scenarios where it's easy to know when to use your shield and get good value. The first one is on escort. You always need to shield during the second and fourth stage of armor and fight to get the repairs. Preferably you would want to shield behind the Reta and have a resupply in the radius, so your scout can start repairing and people can take the resupply at the same time if they need to. On salvage, during the uplink phases, you should shield if your team gets pushed inside the bubble by the oppressor, for example, or if you're killing a bulk detonator to prevent deaths to meatballs. It's very important to keep track of your team's ammo and HP inside the bubble. If somebody is low, then it's a good idea to use your shield. A very common mistake beginners make is they use their shield a lot in panic. Naturally, as you gain more experience, you'll learn how to be more conservative with your shields, but I want you to understand that the safety with your shields comes mainly from the timing of the shield, not from the amount of shields you use. If there is not enough threat and you're using your shield, you're just wasting it, and you only got 2 shields per resupply. You need to keep the balance between thinking how valuable the shield is, but also getting a good timing. The last thing that I wanted to talk about in this section is the issue with using your last shield, when you only have one left. Next time you resupply, the cooldown will start over, so you would have to wait for another 12.5 seconds. So, generally when you have only one shield left, you want to keep it as a last resort. After you've used it, you should always let your teammates know that you're out of shields. If somehow you end up in a situation of mismanaging your shields, let's say you have full primary and secondary ammo, but there are 0 shields left, you should take the resupply early just for the shields. Obviously it's a very bad scenario and you shouldn't end up here in the first place, but if you happen to do so, then you would rather waste ammo upon resupplying early. Now, the last part of our loadout that I haven't talked about yet is ziplines. I don't really think there is much to say, although I believe that ziplines are quite underrated, especially by new players. It's like 90% of the time you don't really care about using them, but here and there you'll encounter some very specific scenarios that require you to use ziplines. I think the length upgrade in tier 1 is being slept on. Usually people use the increased angle upgrade. You can always throw ziplines in long tunnels like on market missions to speed up the team, or spam them as much as possible in open areas of the map with elevation changes, because they might become useful later in the mission, you never know, really. To be honest, the biggest tip for ziplines is to not throw the game with them. For example, don't put them too close to deposit points on refinery and salvage, because you don't want your teammates to accidentally grab the zipline instead of depositing the nitra and lose because of that. There is one glitch as of the time of recording this video. The 25% fall damage reduction upgrade in tier 3 applies permanently and only gets reset upon the death. So do with that information whatever you want. It might get fixed in the future, so make sure to double check it. Alright, so that's gonna be it for today's video. Hopefully I managed to present something useful. If you think that I got something wrong or want to add something, then welcome to the comment section. Let me know your feedback. You can also follow me on twitch.tv/Fayree. Have a good one.